Welcome to On Campus at SUNY New Paltz, a program about New Paltz and its community. I'm your host, Abigail Robin, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Eddie Bell, who is my guest. Wonderful, wonderful poet, performer, writer, and public servant. We have a lot to cover today, so we're going to, especially your most recent book of poems and all kinds of things, and your CD, your CD disc,
compact disc,
compact disc, and all you've been doing in terms of performing all over the world, country, southern tours for books, a whole bunch of stuff. But first, I want to ask you to just give us a little bit about your work as the recruitment officer, administrator for the EOP program, and way back in the 70s.
Well, that is going way back.
I know we want to go forward, but we want to go backward a little bit.
I came here in 1967, and that was the year preceding the establishment of Project A, which was the forerunner of EOP. And I kind of got into it by accident. Then acting President John Jacobson, and there was a group of faculty that were very interested in actually integrating New Paltz, bringing students from New York City, because at that time most of the students came from Long Island and like that, and very few students from the inner cities. Yeah, from the inner city of the 5 boroughs. So there was a group of faculty that were meeting and talking about making a change, and they invited me in, and after joining them.
You were the first black administrator.
Well, I was the first. I wasn't in admission then. I came here as a track coach and in the physical education department. But after I met with that group, and then acting President John Jacobson asked me would I, when the program was officially approved, asked me would I serve as director. So I was still teaching and still coaching, and also the director of the, at that time called Project A, which was then called Special Admission Process, the next name, and then it eventually became EOP. And the funding came from the state, but initially there was no funding.
Wow.
Bill Sample, who was then the director of financial aid, really put the funding together from local campus sources, and, the federal government. And
well, that's wonderful.
So I served a year until they hired a full-time director, who was Rufus Newland, and went on from there.
It certainly did go on from there. And recently you were the Honorable Eddie Bell at the initiation of new members of the fraternity, which is part of EOP. What is it called? I forget.
Chi Alpha Epsilon.
Chi Alpha Epsilon. It was a wonderful speech that you gave, because I was there listening to you. It was really, really great. But what we really want to talk about is the future, and the future as a really good, solid, wonderful writer. New book, and you've done, this is your second how many publications?
My third book.
This is your third book. Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, How to Lynch a Negro. Royal Fireworks is the press who published it this year. And you've done all kinds of readings. So tell us a little bit about that book, how it came to be, and all yourself.
All right. Well, it's time to lynch a Negro, and Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, Time to Lynch a Negro.
Oh, okay.
And that's kind of an out there title.
Certainly is.
But my publisher suggested when we started that he wanted the book to stand out and people to know what it was about. And actually what it is, it's really about people that were affected by lynching, not so much about the act of lynching itself. There's some of that in there, but it's really about the mothers, the fathers, the people that were lynched. It's about the people and the effects before and after a lynching occurred. It's a fiction book, but it's been well researched. I worked on the research probably 3 years or more. I went down to Alabama to the lynching archives at Tuskegee Institute, of course on the internet, and I read books that were available, and then I also spent a very valuable time with a filmmaker by the name of Go Davis, who lives in Rhode Island. And he's making a film called American Lynching. I don't know if he's ever completed it or not, but at the time he was working on it. But he had...
You're making me breathless. This is so exciting.
But he had a vast... he had done lots and lots of interviews, taped interviews of people who were affected by lynchings. And he shared a lot of that information with me. And so I put all that together and kind of drew these bits and pieces from all my sources of all the resources that I did in the research, and built these characters that are in the book. It's poetry and also short stories.
Wow.
But the original idea for doing it was going to be a photography project. You know, I'm a photographer.
Yes, I do.
And I was at a writer's retreat, Ragdale Foundation in Lake Forest, Illinois, and one of the fellows that was there with me suggested that a good project might be photographing lynching sites as they exist today. And I thought it was a good idea at first, and I said, oh, I think I might jump on this. But as I got into it and I started my research and things like that, they were too many and too widespread, and it just would have been a very improbable project to try to complete. So I
would have been a travel.
Oh, I just
all over.
All over, and so I decided it was probably better to write about it. So that was the beginning of the book.
And that was when?
And I started with poetry. That was.
Well, you've been writing poetry for as long as I've known you.
But I started to tell the story in poetry, and I got through quite a bit, and then I realized I couldn't do everything I wanted to do with poems. And that's why I added the short stories. So it's really a combination of poetry and short stories.
And I understand that you've finished your first novel.
I finished my manuscript for my first novel.
Excuse me.
Which covers the years. I went to school in the South at Tennessee State, and during the years of segregation, I went down in '58. And I experienced the whole of black college experience during its heyday, when kids from, I was in New York, but kids from New York went south to school, to the black colleges, historically black colleges, and so the book is kind of based there and it kind of tells that story, but it follows an individual who I've named Eddie Bates. It's not me, but I might be a prototype, but it kind of goes through that era, but it covers the sit-ins, it covers the pageantry, it covers pledging a fraternity and all of those things, but it tells a story that probably hasn't been told much.
Good.
In writing. So right now I'm still, the manuscript is done as far as I can do it, and now I'm looking for an agent to promote it so I can eventually get it published.
Okay, well that's in the future.
Yes, that's in the future.
That is in the future.
But right now, this book came out in January, and I had my debut tour in February, end of January and went into February.
That's when you went to North Carolina?
I went to North Carolina, I went to Alabama, I went to Florida.
Oh, wow.
I went to Detroit.
What was the reception like? Very,
very well. Some crowds were larger than others, but it was very interesting in Alabama because I wondered how people would take that. And the audience in Alabama was older black people.
Oh,
and it was interesting. I didn't know how they would react to this, but it was a very good reaction. They came up and thanked me for doing it. And they said this story needs to be told. It's not told in schools, and so they were very receptive to it. But also I went to a college in Florida where the audience was all white. And the experience was quite different, but still very receptive.
How?
Well, just because the backgrounds of the people were different, because people in Alabama had lived through this, and these people had not. But it was interesting after the session, people get emotional when they hear the poems. I always get some tears, and I always try to leave people on up notes. I end my last poem in the book is a prayer, actually, and I read a prayer, so that kind of leaves people feeling
a little bit better.
But the book isn't downtrodden, but anyway, interesting. There was an Italian woman there, and she said, "Did you know that?" Which I didn't know, but she said, "Did you know there were some Italians lynched during the civil rights era in the South because they were helping voter registrations?" And then a Greek woman spoke up, and she talked about persecution in Greece. And so it brings out a lot of feelings.
Yes,
people have common bonds, and these are people's stories, and that's what this book is about.
And we're going to be right back. This is too exciting, so please bear with us. We're going to be right back.
Okay.